The galaxy was breaking. World after world fell to the Krath Dominion, their fleets sweeping across the stars like a storm that could not be stopped. Cities that once shined with light were turned to ash. Planets that sang with life became silent graves. Every message carried across the void spoke the same words. Help us, please, someone help us. But no help came. The smaller races tried to fight. They raised fleets of their own, but their ships burned. They armed their soldiers, but their lines broke. They built defenses, but the Dominion crushed them with endless numbers. Entire species were forced to kneel, chains bound to their necks, their children dragged away screaming. Those who resisted were destroyed without hesitation. The galaxy was afraid. They had grown used to comfort, to peace, to rules that kept balance between empires. The Dominion ignored all of it. They wanted only power, only control. To them, the weak were not neighbors. They were prey. In their fear, the voices of the broken and enslaved began to turn toward a place many had sworn never to speak of. A place shrouded in warning, whispered like a curse. A single word carried between frightened worlds. Earth. The other races had always kept their distance from Earth. They called it the Death World. The home of predators. A world where storms could shatter mountains, where beasts hunted without mercy, where life itself fought tooth and claw to survive. They said no species born from such a planet could ever be gentle. Humanity was seen not as friends but as monsters who wore the shape of people. For centuries, the galaxy avoided them. Better to live in peace, they thought, than to awaken the monsters from their world of pain. Yet now, with the Dominion burning everything, desperation tore away fear. The first messages to Earth were filled with trembling words. Pleas, promises, even offers of tribute if the humans would come. The galaxy begged those they once shunned. Save us, please, we cannot fight them alone. For a long while there was silence. The messages went unanswered. Rumors spread across the stars. Maybe humanity was gone, maybe they would not listen, maybe the monsters of Earth did not care. Some lost hope completely. Then one day a voice spoke back. It was not a kind voice. It did not comfort or soothe. It did not promise friendship. It was cold, steady, like steel drawn from fire. A single message was sent, broadcast to every world that had begged. We have heard you. We will come. The words spread faster than fire. Across colonies where slaves wept, hope lit their eyes. Across fleets that had nearly given up, captains clenched their fists with renewed strength. Across Dominion command ships, admirals sneered but felt an unfamiliar edge of fear. The monsters of Earth had answered. Those who had studied humanity knew what that meant. They remembered the old wars. The battles fought when humans first reached the stars. Humanity had never lost easily. They were not the largest. They were not the strongest. But they were relentless. They endured what others could not. They fought as if pain meant nothing, as if death itself could not slow them. The galaxy had called them monsters. The galaxy had whispered warnings. But now, when darkness swallowed everything, it was the monsters they turned to. On Earth, the decision was not made lightly. The leaders looked at the images of burning colonies. They heard the voices of children crying across the void. They remembered humanity's own history. Times when no one had come to help them, when they had been left alone in their own suffering. And so they made a choice. Earth would not stay silent. Factories roared to life. Old shipyards, silent for years, began to burn with fire as new hulls were forged. Soldiers were called. Pilots trained. Families said their goodbyes as sons and daughters stepped forward to fight a war that was not their own, but became theirs the moment the pleas were heard. The galaxy watched with unease. They had asked for help, but now they wondered if they had made a mistake. Would humanity save them, or destroy everything in their fury? None could know. All they knew was this: the monsters of Earth were coming. And when they arrived, the galaxy itself would change forever. The Krath Dominion was certain of victory. For years, their fleets had crushed everything in their path. No shield could withstand their cannons, no army could stand against their marching legions. They ruled through fear, and fear had never failed them. So when reports came of human fleets entering contested space, the Dominion laughed. To the Krath, humans were still just Death World primitives. Their records showed a young species with a brutal history. Yes, but one with fleets smaller than most empires, technology less refined, and numbers far too few. The Krath believed it would be easy. "We will break them," one admiral sneered. "We will scatter their bones across the stars." But the humans did not fight like the Krath expected. The first clash came in the shattered remains of the Valak system. Once it had been home to a thriving people. Now it was rubble, its planets burned, its colonies emptied. Dominion dreadnoughts waited there, engines glowing, cannons primed, expecting an easy slaughter. Then the humans arrived. They came in silence, their ships black against the light of distant suns. At first the Dominion laughed. Such small vessels, so few compared to their mighty armada. But when the humans opened fire, the laughter died. The first volley tore through Krath shields as if they were nothing more than paper. Beams of white-hot light cut across the void, burning deep into armored hulls. Dominion dreadnoughts, proud symbols of conquest, burst apart in blossoms of fire. The Krath had believed their technology supreme. Now they watched it shatter. Then came the human gunships. They moved like predators, darting between enemy lines, striking at weak points the Dominion didn't even know they had. While Krath commanders barked orders and struggled to regroup, human pilots flew with terrifying precision. Every move was sharp, every strike brutal. They fought not as soldiers following orders, but as hunters who had studied their prey and were ready to kill. Fighter swarms poured from human carriers. They did not fly in rigid formations as the Krath did. They scattered, weaved, and struck from angles impossible to predict. Each human pilot fought with a fury that shocked their enemies. They did not hesitate. They did not retreat. Even when struck down, they dragged their enemies into fire with them. The battle became chaos. Krath formations collapsed under relentless assault. Their admirals shouted for control, but fear had already taken root. The Dominion had faced rebellions before, uprisings of slaves and smaller fleets, but this was different. The humans were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to win no matter the cost. On the bridge of a crippled Krath flagship, one commander finally whispered what no one dared to say aloud. They fight like monsters. Across the battlefield, enslaved crews watched in awe. For the first time in their lives, they saw the Dominion lose. Chains clattered as hope stirred inside them. Perhaps the galaxy's whispers had been true. Perhaps the monsters of Earth were real, and they had come to tear down the tyrants. When the smoke cleared over Valak, the stars were filled with wreckage. Entire wings of Krath ships had been destroyed. Human fleets, though scarred and battered, still stood strong. Their warships drifted like shadows, guns still hot, engines burning. They had struck first, and they had won. The Dominion, stunned, tried to spread lies. They called the loss a minor setback, claiming the humans had used tricks and luck. But whispers spread faster than propaganda. News carried across trade routes and hidden channels. The Dominion had been defeated, and it was the humans who had done it. On worlds enslaved for generations, the message lit a fire in broken hearts. People who had once bowed their heads in despair lifted their eyes to the sky. The humans had answered their pleas, and the Dominion bled for it. But victory came with a shadow. For every Krath admiral killed, another took his place. For every fleet destroyed, more gathered in the dark. The Dominion was vast, and their pride was wounded. They would not let this insult go unanswered. And the humans? They did not flinch. They prepared for the next strike, knowing full well that the war had only begun. The galaxy had wanted mercy. The Dominion had offered none. Now Earth's monsters had entered the fight, and their first strike was only a warning of the storm to come. The war spread from the stars to the ground. The Krath Dominion had always been cruel. On the worlds they conquered, their armies marched with iron boots, their banners raised high, their soldiers merciless. Villages were burned as examples. Families were torn apart to break the will of the people. Entire populations were forced into labor camps, building ships and weapons for the same empire that had enslaved them. Mercy was a word the Krath did not know. But then the humans arrived. Dropships tore through the skies, their engines roaring like thunder. Black-armored figures poured out. Human marines whose visors glowed red in the smoke. To the enslaved, they looked like demons come to punish the cruel. To the Krath, they were nightmares given flesh. The first ground battle took place on Kaltris, a farming world turned into a labor colony. For decades, the people there had lived in chains, their backs broken under the Dominion's rule. When the humans landed, the Krath laughed at their numbers. But the laughter did not last. Human marines advanced with a fury the galaxy had never seen. They moved fast, striking hard, leaving no time for the enemy to breathe. Dominion troops fired volleys, but the humans did not stop. They kept pushing, step after step, closer and closer, as if pain and fear meant nothing. Their weapons cut through armor. Their hands broke chains. Where they walked, prisoners were freed and guards fell silent. For the first time, the Krath commanders begged for terms. Over the comms, they shouted for parley, for surrender. Their voices shook with fear, words they had never spoken before.
We yield. Spare us.
But the humans gave no reply. To them, surrender was too late. They remembered the burnt colonies, the silent ruins, the endless cries for help that the Dominion had ignored. They remembered the children taken from their parents, the enslaved beaten into the dust, the voices that begged for mercy and were answered with cruelty. Now the Krath begged in turn, but humanity was done listening. On Caltris, human soldiers pushed through the final stronghold. Dominion officers threw down their weapons, raising their hands high. They screamed for their lives, but the humans' eyes were cold. The Marines marched past them, freeing the chained, gathering the weak, and carrying the broken to safety. The commanders who had ruled with fire and chains were left lying in silence, their pleas drowned in the dust. The galaxy watched in shock. Other races had expected humans to fight, but they had not expected this. The humans were not offering peace. They were not offering forgiveness. They were delivering judgment. Whispers spread. Some said the humans were too ruthless, that they were no better than the Dominion. But those whispers never came from the freed. For the ones who had lived under the Dominion's whip, the humans were saviors. They saw the fire in their eyes not as cruelty, but as justice. For once, the tormentors were the ones who suffered, and the oppressed stood tall again. On one colony, a child clung to a human soldier's leg, tears falling down her dirt-streaked face. She looked up at the towering figure in black armor and whispered, "Will you leave us too?" The soldier knelt, removing his helmet, showing a tired but gentle face. He did not answer with words. He simply lifted the child into his arms and carried her away from the ruins. For her, that was enough. But for the Krath, it was terror. Across every front, their officers reported the same thing. Humans did not bargain. Humans did not forgive. The Dominion's power was built on fear, but now fear was turned against them. Their soldiers, once arrogant and cruel, found themselves hunted. Their fleets, once unstoppable, now hesitated to move forward. And worst of all, their commanders began to doubt. The humans had denied mercy. They had answered cruelty with something far greater. In their wake, liberated worlds wept with relief. Chains were broken. Prayers were whispered. Songs of freedom rose for the first time in generations. But in the shadows, Dominion leaders trembled. They had asked for mercy when the battle turned. And humanity had answered not with words, but with silence. The silence of monsters who had chosen not to forgive. And the war was far from over. The war began to change. For the first time in generations, the Krath Dominion was on the back foot. Their fleets, once feared as endless, were being shattered in open space. Their soldiers, once arrogant and merciless, were hunted down in cities they thought they owned. And worst of all, their slaves were no longer silent. Everywhere the humans fought, rebellions ignited. On Caltris, where Marines had broken chains, the news spread like wildfire to neighboring systems. Across mines, factories, and camps, whispers carried on trembling lips. The humans are here. The Dominion can bleed. That truth was enough to spark revolts. On the world of Desh, miners who had lived underground for decades picked up their tools as weapons and rose against their overseers. On the agricultural moons of Quarren, slaves set fire to the very fields they had once been forced to harvest, burning away the Dominion's food supplies. In every corner of the galaxy, people who had once been too afraid to breathe freely now dared to fight. The Dominion tried to crush these uprisings, sending troops to stamp them out. But wherever they turned, the humans were there too. Gunships swept low across cities, striking at garrisons before they could move. Marines dropped into labor camps, cutting chains before the guards even realized what was happening. In space, human cruisers hunted down transports carrying reinforcements, leaving entire regiments stranded and powerless. The more the humans fought, the more courage spread. It was not just battles, they were lighting fires inside the hearts of the broken. The galaxy began to see humanity differently. They were not simply destroyers, not just monsters. They were a storm tearing down tyrants. They were vengeance given shape. And yet for the enslaved they were also hope. But for the Dominion, this hope became terror. Commanders sent frantic reports back to the capital. The humans cannot be stopped. Every system they enter is lost to us. The slaves are rising faster than we can contain them. Entire fleets are refusing orders. Fear spreads faster than fire. Dominion admirals, once proud and unshakable, began to argue among themselves. Some wanted to retreat and fortify their core worlds. Others demanded larger offensives, hoping to crush the humans with sheer numbers. But every attempt ended the same. The humans endured. The humans struck back harder. They did not fight for territory. They did not fight for wealth. They fought to break the Dominion, and they would not stop until it was ash. On one liberated world, a crowd of freed people gathered around a human officer. His armor was scarred, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, but his voice carried with quiet strength. You are free now, not because of us, but because you chose to stand. Do not bow your heads again. Stand tall. The Dominion will never rule you again. The words spread through recordings and whispers. Across the galaxy, people who had never seen a human in their lives repeated them as if they were sacred. Stand tall. Do not bow again. The Krath Dominion had ruled with fear for so long that they believed nothing could challenge them. But fear, once turned against them, became poison in their veins. Their soldiers began to desert. Their fleets hesitated to engage. And in the silence between battles, their leaders began to realize the truth. This was not just a war. It was the unraveling of their empire. The turning tide was not just about weapons or ships. It was about hearts. It was about people who had once accepted chains, now daring to fight back. And at the center of it all were the humans, the monsters the galaxy had once feared, now carrying freedom in their hands. For the oppressed, every human victory was a promise that tomorrow could be brighter. For the Dominion, every human victory was a reminder that their end was near. The tide had turned, and it would not turn back. The Dominion was unraveling. For centuries, the galaxy had trembled before the Krath. Their fleets blotted out suns. Their soldiers crushed every spark of resistance, and their very name was enough to silence entire planets. But now that silence was broken. The sound of rebellion spread like thunder, rolling from system to system, louder each day. And at the heart of it all were the humans. They did not rule with fear. They did not enslave. They came as warriors, yes, but also as liberators. Wherever they fought, they carried more than guns. They carried hope. It was hope that burned brighter than any fire, sharper than any blade. Hope was something the Dominion could not kill, no matter how many worlds they burned. Admirals of the Krath gathered in their war councils, their faces pale with dread. Reports piled high, fleets destroyed, planets lost, slaves rebelling, supply lines cut. For every ship they built, 3 were lost. For every planet pacified, 2 more rose in fire. They whispered to each other words they had never dared before. We cannot win. On the ground, the fear was worse. Dominion troops, once proud, now looked over their shoulders at every shadow. They feared the sudden scream of human gunships in the sky. They feared the sight of black-armored Marines emerging from smoke. They feared the chants of freed slaves louder than gunfire. Fear, which they had once used as their weapon, had turned against them. One Krath commander, facing defeat on the world of Vanar, shouted to his men, "They are only flesh. They are only mortals. Fight them!" But even as he spoke, his troops dropped their weapons, choosing surrender over facing T. He humans again. The galaxy was watching. Empires that had once stayed quiet now whispered of alliance. Neutral systems that had bowed to Krath demands now defied them openly. The myth of the Dominion's invincibility was shattered, and the truth spread faster than any fleet could stop. The age of Krath was ending, and everywhere, in camps and cities, in mines and fields, people lifted their heads to the stars. They no longer whispered in fear. They shouted in hope. The Deathworlders fight for us! For the first time in history, the Krath Dominion, the great terror of the galaxy, knew what it felt like to be afraid. The Krath Dominion was no more. Across the galaxy, the shattered remnants of their fleets drifted in silence. Commanders who had once ruled with cruelty were either captured or fled into hiding, their empires reduced to ruins. Worlds that had cowered in fear for centuries now breathed freely. And above it all, the human fleets moved, not as conquerors, but as watchers, as guardians. The galaxy stared. For so long, humans had been feared, spoken of as monsters. Their history, born on a harsh, unforgiving planet, had shaped them into survivors, warriors, killers when needed. But now the universe saw another side, saviors. Liberated populations cheered from the surface of their planets. Children who had never known safety ran into the arms of Marines who had descended from orbit like titans. Families reunited. Shackles were burned and banners of freedom rose where once the Dominion's flags had hung. The humans did not linger to claim planets or take what they could. They only struck, freed, and moved on, leaving hope in their wake. In the halls of the once mighty Dominion command, fear had turned to despair. No fleet could regroup fast enough, no army could stop the relentless advance. Every attempt to resist ended in ruin, and everywhere the humans passed, slaves had picked up weapons, miners had torn down their chains, and soldiers had abandoned their posts. The galaxy was learning a lesson centuries too late. Mercy ignored will always find a reckoning. On one of the freed worlds, a human captain addressed a crowd of survivors. His armor was scratched, his eyes tired, but his voice rang clear. "We did not come for glory. We did not come for conquest. We came because we could not ignore cries for help. And we will never ignore them again. Stand tall. Protect each other. Build what was broken." Everywhere the message spread. Empires that had hidden in neutrality now pledged aid. Races who had lived in fear dared to speak openly of freedom. Humanity's name became a symbol of something greater than war, a promise that no one, no matter how weak, would be abandoned. But the humans were not angels. They did not forgive the Dominion lightly. Leaders who had enslaved millions faced judgment. Worlds that had been burned had their conquerors' fleets left to drift, crippled and helpless as warning. Humans remembered the screams, the pain, the years of oppression, and they ensured that justice was meted fairly but firmly. And yet, for all their fury, there was a strange mercy in their approach. Those who surrendered honestly, who stopped their cruelty, were allowed to live. For humanity knew the value of second chances, but only for those who truly chose to change. The rest would find no hiding from the storm. In the void above a liberated system, a small scout ship broadcast a simple message to every world in range. "We are not your rulers. We are not your chains. But if tyranny rises again, remember what happens when Earth's monsters come." The galaxy listened. And for the first time in centuries, it believed, human fleets began to withdraw to their own systems, not out of defeat or fear, but because their work was done, for now. Worlds had been freed, hope rekindled, and the Dominion broken. The humans left behind more than ships or soldiers. They left courage, knowledge, and a vision of a universe where freedom mattered more than fear. Across the stars, whispers turned into songs, songs of the monsters who had saved them, stories of the Death Worlders who had walked into the fire and come out victorious, tales that would be told for generations about how a species born from hardship, shaped by pain, became the shield of the galaxy. The humans did not boast. They returned to their systems quietly, silently watching, knowing that the galaxy had learned something invaluable. Underestimating Earth was the gravest mistake any empire could make. And somewhere, deep in space, the survivors of the Dominion looked up at the stars with fear still in their hearts. They knew now that mercy ignored is never forgotten. They had begged for their lives, and the monsters of Earth had answered, relentlessly, without hesitation, and with the fury of a species forged to endure everything. The galaxy had been saved. The Dominion had fallen. And humanity? Humanity had walked away, not as conquerors, but as monsters who gave the universe a second chance. The stars, for the first time in a long time, felt alive again. The galaxy had always spoken of humans in whispers. To many, they were not people at all. They were predators wearing the shape of a man. Stories traveled across trade routes, stories told in low voices in cantinas and markets, that on their homeworld, even the ground itself tried to kill them. The air was filled with storms that could rip down forests. Oceans gave birth to monsters with teeth longer than a man's arm. On land, beasts stalked the night, waiting for a single mistake. To live on Earth was to fight every day against hunger, against danger, against death itself. The galaxy called it a cursed planet, a death world. And from that cursed place came humanity. Civilizations born on gentle worlds could not imagine such life. They thought no species shaped by such cruelty could know peace. If they survived at all, surely they would be savage, unfeeling, untrustworthy. And so while humanity rose into the stars, the great empires kept their distance. They watched from afar, careful never to provoke, careful never to invite the monsters too close. But now the galaxy had no choice. The Krath Dominion had become a tide of fire, washing across systems without pity. Empires that once laughed at Earth now sent messengers on trembling wings, asking those they feared most for salvation. The humans listened. They did not answer with comforting words. They did not say, "Do not fear, we will save you." Humanity had never been known for promises of peace. Instead, they prepared. From orbit above Earth, stations lit up, their lights blinking like awakening giants. Factories deep in mountain ranges began to roar, fire and smoke pouring from their chimneys as war machines were built faster than ever before. Shipyards, silent for decades, came alive with thunder. Hulls of steel grew in the darkness of space, massive vessels whose shadows covered the stars. And then, they launched. The first to rise were the destroyers and cruisers. Black iron skin glimmered in the light of distant suns, their armor thicker than anything the Dominion had ever faced. After them came the carriers, titanic beasts of war that carried hundreds of smaller craft within their bellies. They moved like predators, silent, watchful, and patient. The galaxy looked to the skies and felt fear stir inside them, for even before humanity fired a single shot, their fleets carried the presence of monsters. To the frightened races waiting for help, the sight of human warships was like watching storms arrive, black, endless, and merciless. To them, salvation had not come dressed as angels. It had come dressed as demons. The first broadcasts from the human fleets carried no soft greetings. The message was short, stripped of comfort, heavy as iron. "We heard your cries. We bring war." The words echoed across 1,000 channels, and with those words the galaxy trembled. On the slave worlds held by the Dominion, whispers spread quickly. Among the chained and beaten, hope returned in quiet voices. The humans are coming. Among the Dominion masters, a chill passed through even the proudest commanders. The humans are coming. For those who had studied them, there was no question what this meant. Humanity was not the strongest, not the tallest, not the most advanced. But they carried something more dangerous than all of that: unyielding will. They did not stop when wounded. They did not give up when cornered. They did not forget when wronged. On the bridge of a Dominion dreadnought, an admiral sneered as reports of Earth's fleets arrived. He mocked them as fragile primates, claiming their bones would break under the weight of real war. But his aides could not hide their unease. They had read the ancient records, the fragments of battles humanity had fought long ago. Every empire that had underestimated Earth had bled for it. Some had vanished entirely. The galaxy knew humanity as monsters, and now those monsters were on the move. Entire flotillas departed Earth. Families said their goodbyes under banners of black and steel. Mothers wept. Children clung to their fathers. Lovers embraced for what might be the last time. But in every farewell was fire. No one stepped onto a warship without knowing the cost. Humanity had fought too many wars in their history to treat this lightly, and yet not a single soldier hesitated. They went not for conquest, but because they remembered. Humanity remembered what it meant to suffer alone, what it meant to cry for help and hear only silence. They would not let the galaxy endure that fate. Not again, not while they lived. And so the fleet spread outward, pouring into the void. Black hulls swallowed the stars, engines howled like beasts, and the galaxy held its breath. The Krath Dominion had been warned. They had been told monsters were real. Now those monsters were coming for them.